I imagine people probably want to hear us talk about enterprise mobility, since you being the expert in this area. I'm very curious, actually, to hear, Kevin, what your thinking is at this time of year as we come into 2014. What are the new trends and the things that you see affecting enterprise mobility at the high level for the coming year?
Oh yeah, great question. Usually I'm the one asking questions, but Glenn's going to take the lead today. Thanks for doing that, Glenn. You know, there's a huge amount of attention right now going toward cloud. And, you know, for a long time I've been thinking, you know, when I have my iPhone or my mobile device, I kind of look for my security, or assume the security comes from the network, from AT&T or Verizon or something like that. When it comes to my voice and other things, maybe I'm completely wrong, but I like to pay for additional services through the network and through cloud-based solutions. So I'm hearing a lot of talk about cloud, and there's a lot of platform players out there talking the cloud. I know Magic Software and others are looking to put more and more in the cloud around services. And so that's a big one. I'm hearing a lot about security. Again, I think security is natural in the network. I really don't know if there needs to be a lot of security on premise with your own system here. I think it really lends itself to being in the cloud. So also, a lot of the analysts that I've been spending time with lately, they talk about 2014 as the year of complexity, where those simple little productivity apps, those are so 2013 and 2012. 2014 is about, let's really use our brains and our strategy to create complex, sophisticated mobile apps that actually give us a competitive advantage because they do things different and better than everybody else. It's not something you can pull off the shelf. And that also lends itself to more custom programming as well, because of course we know, especially with SAP and Oracle and the rest of these ERP vendors, it's rare that anybody has one that isn't customized. So to really create a complex, sophisticated app, you're going to have to customize it as well. So those are kind of the big trends that I'm following right now, Glenn.
Well, that's really interesting, because it almost sounds like some of the things like unified communications that everybody was talking about have been adopted, but perhaps not used as much as the specific business-oriented apps that have to do with business process functions. But I'm kind of curious too, Kevin, as far as, you know, the trends that we were talking about a year ago. Everyone was talking about BYOD and how that's impacting things, and we know that BlackBerry is certainly, you know, seems to have dropped off the radar significantly. We seem to find that there are, you know, continuing interest, of course, in Android and iPhone. What do you see as the device preference trends that are affecting BYOD, and how that's going to impact what people need in the enterprise for IT purposes?
Yeah, again, I think with BYOD, it's an assumption today. So people may, in fact, stop talking about it because nobody questions the validity of a BYOD for most of their applications. Nobody wants to be carrying 2 tablets, and most of us, it seems like, in the knowledge worker space already have a tablet. We already have a quite powerful smartphone. We don't want 2 more of those. So everybody wants the ability to log in. I know that us here at Cognizant, we have those capabilities here where we use our personal devices. We have a secure underlying security platform that partitions off our smartphones for particular company apps, all that kind of stuff, because that's an assumption that everybody's going to have. I don't think anybody here at Cognizant either gets a company phone anymore. I think everybody uses personal phones. And I think that's really, it's the assumption going forward in that area. What was part 2 of that, Glenn? I forgot already.
Yeah. No, well, I think when you're saying that, what it really reminds me of is that, you know, almost BYOD is morphing into something new, where we hear people talking about the Internet of Things and wearables. Now, is that 2014, or is that still off into the future, the 2016, 17 range? Where do we see that coming into the choice that people are making to bring new mobile devices with you know, serious enterprise implications into the picture?
Yeah, this is, in a way, that we live in a bubble, Glenn. You and I were in technology, we're knowledge workers, we're kind of paid to think ahead of maybe where the market is right now. And I can tell you what my priorities are for 2014. In fact, my title on my business card changed from SMAC Analyst, which stood for Social, Mobile, Analytics, and Cloud. Many of the viewers here have heard that far too many times, to Digital Transformation, because that's really an umbrella concept that includes the Internet of Things. It includes the merging of the physical world with the digital and the big data analytics around that, the code halos around people, markets, assets, equipment, buildings. So it includes kind of all of this stuff that's impacting every one of us today. So I just bumped up the title a little bit to Senior Analyst of Digital Transformation to represent where we're seeing the future going, and it's absolutely pulling enterprise mobility into the same discussion with the Internet of Things, and bring your own devices now an assumption. So now we're looking at, okay, how are these combinations really going to flip upside down a whole lot of different industries? Because that's, a lot of what we do is we work with very large clients and on strategy, and so we need to be looking ahead and saying, how are all these digital changes going to impact banking, our retail clients, pharmaceutical clients? How are all these things changing within pharmaceutical and the healthcare? Of course, you see all these monitoring devices, which are another part of the Internet of Things, where you can have monitoring devices that report back to your care providers. All these kinds of things then also interact with your smartphones. So we see it all converging around digital transformation today, Glenn.
As you look at those various verticals, Kevin, then where there are apps that are really bringing ROI, are those primarily apps that are facing employees or customers, business partners? What kind of front end do you see? Who's the audience?
So you see a lot of all of them, but one of the things I've been disappointed in to a large degree over the past few years is companies have not necessarily embraced completely new business models as a result of enterprise B2E kinds of mobility, and they should, because and I read about it now, so I think it's changing, but it's just a lot slower than I thought. Today, you can go into a retail environment and the sales associate is going to have an iPad, and they may very quickly recognize who you are and what your history is, either because you've checked in, you've provided your information, you've let the sales associate know that you have a history or an account number there, or the location services that you have and you're connected to their the application for that retail provider lets the associate know who you are, what your history are, what your preferences are, and all that. That is starting to really change the retail experience. So that's a plus. But again, that's an industry using it for customer-facing stuff. So many people, I haven't seen what I thought would be a huge kind of transformation inside companies on how they use it. Now, I think it's because we're still very early on in there. Because if we look at those four things, and here's where I get the plug-in: social, mobile, analytics, and cloud. The social collaboration component is actually changing the way companies are managed, changing the way decisions are made. So I see a lot of that, but it's slow. And I also think because of this slow maturing of this process, you've seen a lot of mobility vendors impacted by this, and some of them have either left the market or merged in with other companies already in the kind of the tightening of the market.
Absolutely, and it's interesting you bring up this slow adoption rate in the enterprise for employee-facing apps that affect their core business processes. I wonder how much of that barrier has to do with integration and the lack of awareness as to how companies need to go about integrating their mobile apps into the back-end systems.
Well, I think that's a big deal, and what you're seeing on a trend level, Glenn, is that the industry is moving, the mobile vendor industry, the enterprise mobility industry, if you would, is actually moving more and more focused, as you guys are, toward the dynamics around platform integration and the complexity that you can solve by bringing your tools to that integration. because what's really interesting is that all mobile application development platforms, as an important part of that component, used to include a SDK, a software development kit, and they would spend a huge amount of their R&D funds trying to do that, build once, support all the different platforms, etc. You're seeing a trend kind of moving a little bit away from that, in that there's so many powerful tools out there that companies are, and the complexity that they're recognizing is actually back at the platform level. So you see companies kind of changing their strategy within the vendor community to focus more on the platform play.
That's interesting. So as the need for those SDKs and development efforts shift towards platforms, do you see the people involved in making the decisions within the IT department changing as well? I mean, who are the people who are really making decisions about mobile adoption, new apps, what those apps need to be, how they need to integrate, and those kinds of things?
Well, you know, we talked a little bit earlier about this kind of the slow maturing process or slow adoption of mobility in the enterprise. Everybody started talking about it. Everybody was engaged in multiple proof of concepts, but you were not seeing the levels of large-scale implementation early on that we all expected in the industry, and that really is because of that complexity, Glenn. The complexity of not knowing what tools they should use, not knowing not having an enterprise-wide strategy that they were comfortable and confident in, that would allow them to make big ticket purchases. So they were keeping mobility to be in very simple little productivity apps, very inexpensive. But you know what? 2014 is the year of complexity, of really driving mobility to create the competitive advantages that are necessary. So this year is where I think you're going to have companies that finally have a strategy in place that are confident in, and they're willing to start spending money to really transform their business and create the competitive advantages that we all thought they could have done back in 2011 and 2012, but they waited to gain a lot more confidence in the market. And you have so many good SDKs out there, and especially companies that have been studying this for a long time have started making decisions now because they're comfortable with how they can move forward in a standardized method.
So you are seeing people making decisions to move forward despite this complexity. That's interesting. And do you think that as they're doing that, the kind of decisions that they're facing in 2014 are different than the decisions they were making in the past? What's your final take on really what people should be looking at in 2014?
Yeah, so a couple things. Agility is so important. You know, I've been in enterprise mobility since 2000, so going on 14 years here, and I've seen so many companies end up with a second, third, and fourth decision on mobile vendors and mobile platforms because it continued to be dead-ended. They would get to a point where suddenly their platform would no longer support their device or the operating system that has started out, or the devices they were on were no longer supported by the vendors or the manufacturers. Companies have reached a point where they say, now we understand how to abstract the various components of enterprise mobility so we won't end up in a sunset event. We know now how to create a standardized integration environment. We've got the right platforms. We've got the right partners and vendors in place or lined up where we're comfortable we're not going to end up in another dead end. And there's all these SDKs out there that are open, that are standards-based, that can in fact work with multiple platforms. So they're comfortable being able to use a variety of different tools to get there. So now the focus is quickly changing to how can we have integrated analytics? How can we include social components and collaboration components within our mobile apps? And how can we secure this? So the questions are different, and the questions are really logical. It's just that you had to figure out those other components before you started getting to these components, which today are, in fact, in my estimate anyway, security, agility, and social collaboration as a built-in component with integrated analytics, all as part of enterprise mobility solutions today.
Well, Kevin, it sounds like despite the cold weather that we've all been experiencing, things are heating up in the enterprise mobility market. People are making decisions, looking at their strategies. I certainly think that what you've said is going to resonate with Magic Software's customers who are making these very same decisions, and a lot of it resonates with what we've already been hearing. So I want to thank you very much for taking your time today and hanging out with me here, and I hope that we'll see everyone again very soon on another Hangout.
Thanks very much, Glenn. Good luck this year.
Thanks.